Hello, everyone. It's Dan King here from Fireside Strategic. As always, welcome to our videocast, Humanity Builds Better Businesses, where we celebrate leaders that do transformational work within organizations, helping their clients grow and lead teams with humanity. Today, I'm very happy to be chatting with Heather Bordo, executive coach and founder of Bordo and Associates. Heather, welcome to the show. Great to have you. Would love to learn just a little bit about you and your practice to start.
Sounds great. Thank you, Dan. I'm thrilled to be here and appreciate the chance to chat with you this morning. So a little bit about me and my practice. I've had a practice doing executive coaching and what I call strategic facilitation and consulting work for 16 years. I'm at that stage in life where I don't want people to do the math around those numbers, but it's certainly been a tremendous journey. I feel privileged to do it. So I get to work with, executives, leaders, sometimes board members in entrepreneurial companies, Fortune 500s, and sort of everything in between to really help them be who they most want to be and achieve what they most want to achieve. And it's tremendous work. And then I also do lots of work around helping groups, collaborate productively and achieve the outcomes that they most desire. So both at the individual and the group level.
Curious about the group level. What are some of the obstacles that tend to come up in your work that you've noticed tend to stop groups from collaborating in that powerful way?
Certainly a big one is around assumptions that people make. So, the starting point for enabling groups to work together effectively and productively is always about getting them to a shared understanding. And there's lots of things that get in the way of that shared understanding. And often a big one is different assumptions that they hold on to, even different levels of knowledge, different perspectives, all the things that contribute to that.
It's amazing how often that basic step of what are we trying to achieve here gets skipped. The easiest thing in the world to skip that step. We're all very busy. We feel pressure to get things done. And just taking that little basic moment, mindful moment to check in and ensure that we're on the same page, it gets skipped so often.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think when groups are operating in organizations, that's when it especially gets skipped. So, if I'm facilitating a group process, I'm thoughtful, obviously, and have planned kind of a process to enable them to get on the same page. And I think what I see a lot of, and I see it in the work I do as a coach and in working with groups and organizations, is those steps aren't taken and it's just assumed that everyone will have that same level of understanding or will be able to gain it very quickly. And so the right steps aren't taken to get everyone on the same page. And that creates a lot of conflict for sure.
And once the conflict begins, do you play a role in, hopefully the conflict doesn't begin, but if the conflict does begin, do you play a role in mediating and conflict resolution?
Yes, I think, again, when I'm kind of facilitating a group process, absolutely. So if, people are communicating in a way that's adversarial, you sort of establish some ground rules up front to give yourself permission as a facilitator to intervene, but would certainly reframe comments like that could be negatively perceived, would point back to not unlike coaching, right? How the group has agreed at the outset they want to show up and behave with one another. And I think really it's similar work on an individual level.
Really interesting. Would you say that some conflict can actually be healthy? I mean, I think a lot of organizations are extremely conflict averse, and certainly conflicts that unnecessarily hurt people's feelings are not something we want. On the other hand, if we're very conflict averse, maybe we brush under the rug some honest truths that need to be discussed.
Absolutely, right? It's not unlike personal relationships, right? They say if there's no conflict, someone is probably not being totally candid about how they're feeling. And the same is true in organizations. So I think having different perspectives, I think especially in today's, I think especially today, people have a heightened awareness of how incredibly important and valuable those different perspectives are, and enabling them to come out productively is critical. So, absolutely, you don't want to shut down those diverse perspectives. And a lot of the work that I do with groups is around finding those effective ways that allow people to feel comfortable and safe,
Yeah.
enabling different perspectives to be shared. Because if you shut those
Yeah.
down, you lose so much value and
Yes.
richness and so much. Yeah.
Yes. Not sure if you're familiar with the group dynamics. Hold on. Group relations conferences the Tavistock Institute puts on. I don't know if you're familiar with any of those.
Don't know that one particularly. No.
Um, Group dynamics conferences, for anyone that hasn't had the powerful experience of going to one, reveal the roles that we tend to play in groups. I think they're different than who we are as individuals. We take on certain identities and roles whenever we're in group contexts.
Mm.
And it's amazing how someone can just find themselves, for example, um, almost just sort of holding the group's anxiety for them. Identities that may show up in not as strongly when we're just alone or in very small groups can show up more powerfully in bigger groups. There's something about, um, you know, I, for those that haven't had the experience, there are group dynamics conferences in which 80 people are stuck in a room for an extended period of time. And the only task is to talk about the group dynamics in the room.
Right.
And it's one of the richest human experiences I've ever had.
I can appreciate that. Well, and
Mm-hmm.
I think often, being able to name what's going on and share it. I think the human tendency often, like with many emotions, is to try and make them go away fast, right? So perhaps ignore that elephant in the room, or, if there's, a emotion that seems hard to handle, to just, tell someone they'll be okay and encourage them to take a big breath and keep going. And I think we do a
Yeah.
disservice when we do that. That's not to say that we want to turn every conversation in a business environment into therapy or some such thing. We absolutely
Mm-hmm.
don't want to do that, because we're not equipped in organizations to be able to handle that. And finding the effective ways that those, if someone's got a lot of emotion behind something, understanding why that is, acknowledging that, making it
Yes.
okay for people to show up, with how they're feeling, and not requiring
Yes.
them to shut that whole part of themselves down. Again,
Yeah.
that's critical to enabling people to be human in the workplace.
Yes. Yes. And if we can't be human, we're not drawing on our full selves. We're not going to achieve our goals as effectively as we might. Otherwise, we're not going to be as creative. We're not going to contribute to organizations as powerfully as we might.
For sure not. And I think when people don't recognize, when people are forced to shut down those emotions, they also then can't recognize what's driving their behavior, right? Because if
Mm,
I'm, if something is upsetting me and I feel like I can't express that, well, that upset is probably going to come out in frustration, or, maybe I'm going to
yes.
get angry, or I'm going to lash out at someone. And that contributes to dynamics that don't tend to be healthy. So giving the space is important.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. Yeah. Yeah. Without emotional expression, self-awareness is diminished. It's like an individual self-awareness is diminished, and thus the organizations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right.
Mm.
And so, yeah, one of the things I talk a lot about with clients is, being aware of how they're feeling. I have a entrepreneurial client that I work with, and, he, starting his business, sort of had a lot of frustration about the things that weren't the way he wanted them to be, and the way he expected them to be, and the way he felt he would have handled them if he were in the shoes of others. And so understanding that when he sort of led with that frustration and engaged in dialogue with others with that level of frustration very high, the outcome was never good, right? So enabling him to kind of step back and say, okay, let me check in with myself first. Let me understand how I'm feeling. And if it's not good, let me figure out how I can, potentially reframe that, or maybe not pick that moment to have that conversation.
Makes a lot of sense. Switching gears for a moment, I'm curious how this sort of became your work in the world. If you could sort of summarize for listeners, because I think it's always good for people to understand the human behind the work. What led you to do this work in the world?
Yeah. I mean, I think I was always wired towards it. When I was a kid, I was the person that people called with their challenges at all hours
Yeah.
of the night. I studied psychology in my undergrad, so I was always really interested in how people behaved and what drove that. And I started my career playing these sort of weird and wonderful roles, self-created largely in organizations, kind of internal and external consulting roles. And um, I remember one leader in particular who I sort of watched him be so driven by his own ambitions that
Mm,
his behavior to others was really quite dehumanizing. And I remember feeling like I wanted to pluck him out of the organization and kind of take him somewhere where he could just take some deep breaths, get clear on his vision, what mattered to him, and so I remember having this conversation with a colleague and saying, I wish I could just take leaders off that treadmill for a little bit and have them step back and
mm,
reflect on how they want to show up, what's really important to them. Because I think sometimes we
yeah.
get so caught up on the climb or the run or whatever it is. And he said, my colleague said, how are you going to do that? And that's when I took my first coaching course and took myself on the path to become an executive coach. So that was part of the prompt for sure.
Mm. I love the way you put that, get off the treadmill, right? Because the image of the treadmill connotes such repetition, such like nose to the grindstone, the same
Yeah.
step over and over and over. And so I'd be curious for a leader that's listening that perhaps feels they may be in that space of some uncertainty and just sort of going through the motions at the moment and maybe losing touch with that bigger vision. How do you begin that process of helping a leader, first of all, realize that they're on the treadmill and take that initial step off of it?
Yeah. Um, that's a good question. How do I do that? It's one of those things that kind of sometimes the things you do are so unconscious that it's tougher to
Yeah.
make them conscious. And I would say that and part of how I do that sort of formally through my coaching work is, I mean, I start every conversation I have by checking in with where someone's at. So, I really encourage them and I think help them build a muscle of doing that check in and that reflection. So that's one of the sort of informal ways. I mean, certainly in all my executive coaching work, part of the work that I do with clients is around helping them get clear on how they want to be, right? So, not just what they want to do and what they want to achieve, but also how they want to be, how they want to show up,
Mm,
how they want to impact others, as well as perhaps bottom line, top line, all those kinds of things. So I think it's really encouraging the reflection around that. It's through encouraging listening, and through
mm,
doing more listening, having more empathy, helping to gain more understanding of what's contributing to other people's views.
yeah.
Those are some of the pieces for sure.
It almost sounds like, if I'm hearing you correctly, the first step is creating that space, just that simple conversational space where someone can be heard. Just a few questions. I mean, even just, it seems so simple. Where is someone at? But these aren't questions we tend to ask ourselves if we're on the treadmill.
Yeah,
So those basic questions are like an initial pattern interrupt.
that's fair. Yeah. And I think, even questions like what's getting in your way, what holds you back, what stops you from being the person you most want to be. Questions like who do you admire? Sometimes we don't step back and think about who are those that have been the kind of, leaders for us, have engaged us and motivated us to show up the way we want to. So some of those kinds of bigger questions are helpful too.
It's funny you mentioned that. My coach asked me that a few weeks ago. Who do I admire? Like, if I were to pick someone to
Yep.
really aspire to become or at least be inspired by, right? I don't want to exactly become them because we're all unique, but who could I really be
Sure.
inspired by? And
Yeah,
I just hadn't asked myself that question in a long time, and it's very powerful.
for sure. Well, and I mean, one other thing that I've been quite conscious of more recently is even our measures of success, right? Like I think sometimes we take
Mm,
for granted that we should evaluate our success based on our title, based on how many companies we've bought and sold, based on how much money we're making, scale, scope kinds of questions. And sometimes those, there's value in those measures, of course, and there's value in other measures as well. And, sometimes the measure of, what's personally important to achieve, what will be that
mm.
right rhythm in your life that has you feel good about your business and about other parts of your life. So some of those other, more human measures I
Yeah.
found can drive some valuable thinking that help you step back off that treadmill.
I think you're bang on. The treadmill is connected to these external, almost societally imposed measures of success. And as you say, I mean, we don't want to throw those out the window. And we can take pride in achieving those. But by the same token, it's like that whole self-awareness process that we were talking about a few minutes ago is sort of inhibited if the only measures of success are societal, if they come
For
from
sure.
others as opposed to ourselves. And it's like what you're talking about is almost an ability to tap into some intrinsic motivation.
Absolutely. And I think that's the other really important piece because I think, many people are driven by how others will perceive them, right? And I think that's can be a dangerous measure as well because that's an external view. There can be great information in that when you get feedback from others that, can drive helpful learning and ensuring that, you're not driving for someone else's perception, because that's also something that you can't control as a leader, right? And you
Yeah.
can control the kind of relationships that you want to have.
Yes. Yes. I love that. It's like emotionally investing in that which we can't control. Something could go wrong if we do that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And it
Huh.
often does go wrong.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious, as you think about what motivates you, we're still sort of at the beginning-ish of this 2021 year, and sometimes it's a good time to think about what do I really want to achieve this year? And so I'm curious when you think about sort of what matters most to you, what's meaningful to you, what kinds of goals or achievements do you want on your agenda for this year?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, certainly overall, what motivates me and what has always motivated me is really, it's helping those light bulbs go off for others. It's helping them see what they haven't seen before. It's seeing more in others than they see in themselves and helping unlock and unleash that for them, right? So that's what turns my crank and gets me really excited. In terms of this year, I think what I've become increasingly aware of after 16 years of doing this work this way is being more explicit about working with the leaders who want to be more human, who want to focus on how they're being as well as what they're doing, who want to be
Mm,
really the highest version of themselves, however they define that, right? Those are the people that I want to be even more explicit about working with. And I think as a coach, what you learn is the more you put that out there and the more you sort of take your own learnings and express them, the more you draw people to you that want to go on
mm,
a similar journey. And so I think that's one piece. And tied to that for me, is that, it's that being more human, it's that listening in a deeper way, and it's that collaborating and dialoguing with others in, that more open way that comes from a place of shared understanding. And so, I've sort of intentionally, so I'm always learning and I've intentionally put myself in spaces that allow me to hone my muscles around that productive collaboration so that I can bring more of that expertise to my work with individuals and with groups. So I think it's continuing to do that learning, building some new muscles, investing in some new spaces. And I think the other piece that I'm very focused on, that I encourage in leaders that I work with is also surrounding yourself with the people who will both challenge and support you. Not necessarily in that order, depending where you're at, but I think that's another critical piece. So for me, I'm focused on continuing to do that and find sort of new spaces where I can be challenged and supported in learning and developing in new ways.
Oh, fantastic. I definitely got felt some goosebumps and some chills as you were talking about leaders who care deeply about how they're being, right? There's that sort of obvious level of the things we do, and then a level deeper is how we're being. And really, really felt some goosebumps as you described that. So I thought that was awesome.
Appreciate you sharing.
Uh, as we come towards the end of our time together, Heather, we've talked about some powerful subjects today. We've talked about the work you do to bring together teams and to help individuals become greater leaders. Curious what you do for fun when you're not doing that work. How does Heather Bordo relax?
Yeah. So cycling, I mean, there's lots of things I do. Cycling has been one of my passions. Before I had my daughter, I did a first cycling trip when I turned 30 because I said I'm going to do it, while I'm young enough and have the resources and all of that to enjoy it. And then did 6 more because I loved it so much. So cycling in different parts of the world is something that I have a lot of passion for. I have tremendous passion for being with my family, being out in nature, as we were talking about a little bit at the beginning of this. I'm a huge water and mountain girl, and so nature and ocean in particular just soothes my soul. So I can put myself in a place where I have good access to the sound of the water and a good view of it, and a chance to kind of be out adventuring in it. I'm a very happy camper.
Fantastic. Well, Heather, been a pleasure to have you. Really, really interesting conversation about groups, about leadership, and about building a more human business world. So excited about your vision and the work you're doing in the world, and it was great to have you today.
Thank you. It was great to have the chance to talk to you and be part of today's podcast. So thank you.